What if I told you the thing that didn't work out, the job that slipped through your fingers, the relationship that suddenly ended, the opportunity that felt so right but fell apart wasn't a failure, but a form of protection? What if the silence you've been hearing from God is actually his loudest act of love? In the next few moments, I'm going to share a story, not just a message, but a sacred truth that could shift the way you see everything you're going through. So stay with me, because this isn't just about what you lost, it's about what God has been shielding you from and preparing you for. And by the end of this video, you just might see your entire journey through a completely different lens. There are moments in life when silence screams louder than thunder. Moments when prayers are sent up like flares in a stormy sky, and all that returns is stillness. No voice, no sign, no open door. Just an eerie quiet that makes your soul ache and your mind question everything. Have you ever felt like heaven went silent just when you needed answers the most? Like the God you trusted, the God you called Father, suddenly turned his face away. What if I told you that silence was never absence? What if what you mistook as neglect was actually protection? Divine, purposeful, perfectly timed protection. Not from punishment, but from pain you didn't even know was ahead. What if the stillness was the sound of God standing between you and something that could have shattered you? People don't talk about this side of God often. We prefer the stories where he parts seas, breaks chains, and speaks with fire. But what about the moments when he chooses not to act the way we expect? What about when the miracle is the door that didn't open, the job that slipped away, the relationship that fell apart, the dream that stayed a dream? These moments feel like betrayal until time reveals them as mercy. Let's not romanticize this. The silence of God hurts. It tests our faith in ways thunderous miracles never could. It stirs questions too heavy for shallow answers. But that pain, that piercing absence, is the proving ground where trust is forged, not by sight, but by surrender. Imagine this. You're driving fast on a road you believe is taking you closer to your breakthrough. Suddenly, your GPS stops working. The signal vanishes. You're alone with uncertainty. Do you keep driving blindly, or do you pull over and wait for guidance? Most of us, desperate for progress, keep pushing forward. But sometimes God disables your signal on purpose, not to delay you, but to prevent a crash you can't see yet. This is protection, not the kind that makes headlines, not the kind that feels heroic. This protection looks like confusion, sounds like silence, and feels like being forgotten. But it's not. It's sacred. It's surgical. It cuts off paths you would have taken with good intentions but terrible consequences. It reroutes your heart away from premature promises and unripe opportunities. The truth is, we want God's guidance, but we often ignore his no. We pray for clarity, but resist when it comes in the form of closed doors and quiet nights. We equate silence with abandonment. But have you considered that some of your most painful seasons were God's most compassionate interventions? Sometimes God's greatest act of love is to block what you beg for. Let that sink in. You cried for the relationship to be restored. He let it crumble. You fought for that career door to open. He kept it sealed. You believed that this time it had to work. It didn't, and in the moment it felt cruel. But now looking back, isn't there a part of you that's grateful? Maybe not completely, maybe not without some ache, but there's a faint whisper in your soul that says, if that had worked out, I wouldn't be who I am today. That whisper, that's truth, that's growth, that's God. Protection isn't always about saving you from danger. Sometimes it's about saving you from settling. Think about the times when you were ready to compromise just to move forward. When you were so exhausted from waiting that you almost chose someone who didn't see your worth. When you nearly sacrificed your peace for popularity. When you lowered your standards to feel loved. And right before you gave in, something stopped it. You were heartbroken, but you were spared. God isn't just your provider, he's your protector. Not only of your physical life, but of your destiny, your emotional health, your future calling. And sometimes his silence is the clearest way he says, not this, not now, not for you. Let me tell you a secret about divine timing. God never arrives late, but he's also never in a rush. And while we pace the floors of our hearts asking when he is guarding doors we didn't even know were there, the delay isn't a punishment, It's a preservation. You think he's holding you back. He's actually holding you together. But there's more. What if God's silence isn't just protection from something, but protection for something? What if in the quiet he's protecting your ability to hear him more clearly? What if he's shielding you from noise, from distractions, from the clutter of voices that would drown out his whisper? See, in the noise of life, our hearts get divided. Our desires get distorted. We start chasing things that look good but lead nowhere. God knows this. That's why he sometimes pulls us into silence, not to punish us, but to reset us, to recalibrate our spirit, to purify our motives. Because if he gave you what you asked for too soon, it might become an idol. Because if he opened the door before you were ready, it might break you. Because if he blessed your ambition without refining your character, it could ruin you. So he waits. And while he waits, he watches. He strengthens. He hides you not because you're not worthy, but because what's ahead is too important for you to enter unprepared. There's a sacred kind of waiting that feels like exile, but is actually incubation. You're not being sidelined. You're being shielded. So what do you do when God is silent? You lean in. You start listening with your life instead of your ears. You start obeying even without clear instructions. You choose stillness, not as defeat, but as devotion. You say, I trust you, even when I can't trace you, because that is what faith looks like when it grows up. In these quiet seasons, one of the most powerful things you can do is write, not just to vent, but to record, to remember. Start your own journal of the quiet times. Write down what you're learning, what you're losing, what you're discovering, because one day you'll look back and realize this was never silence, it was strategy. And you'll see how the stillness formed your strength. You'll see how your patience sharpened your discernment. You'll see how the pain didn't destroy you, it detoxed you. You'll understand that while you were begging for answers, God was building your foundation. If you're in a quiet season right now, if your prayers feel like echoes and your faith feels thin, this is not the end of your story. It's the undercurrent pulling you toward deeper things. Don't despise it. Don't rush through it. Sit with it. Let it shape you. Let it soften you. Let it do its holy work. Because God's silence is never empty. It's pregnant with purpose. It's filled with things you can't see yet, but will one day thank him for. And when the time is right, when your soul is ready, and your character is strong enough to carry the weight of what he has for you, he will speak. And his voice will be unmistakable. Not because it's loud, but because by then, your spirit will be trained to recognize it in the quietest of moments. You see, the silence wasn't the absence of God. It was the presence of protection. And that's the truth most people miss. So I'll leave you with this. When God is silent, what do you believe is most likely happening? A, he's ignoring me. B, he's protecting and preparing me. Comment A or B below, and let's talk about it together. Your answer may help someone else understand their season more clearly. The sun was setting on the quiet hills of Linton Valley, casting long shadows across the chapel roof, where Sarah had spent hours crying only months earlier. She had been so sure that God's promise was on the other side of the job interview in Chicago. Everything pointed to it, the perfect fit, the open door, the enthusiastic recruiter, and even the scriptures she thought confirmed it all the night before. But the offer never came. Instead, silence and then rejection. She had packed her dreams into that opportunity. It felt like her entire future had collapsed with one email. We regret to inform you. What she didn't know then, standing in the middle of her tiny kitchen in Linton, was that God had just saved her from something she couldn't yet see. And this unexpected detour was not a divine punishment, but a redirection crafted by mercy. It's one thing to believe God is good when everything falls into place, but it's another level entirely to believe he is good when everything falls apart. When life reroutes us, we often panic. We imagine we've missed the blessing fallen behind or failed the test. But what if detours aren't detours at all? What if they are divine directions disguised as disruptions? In Sarah's case, it wasn't until months later, when she reconnected with her childhood friend Elijah, who had moved back to Linton after his own plans unraveled, that she began to understand the detour. Together, they started a small counseling group at their church for people recovering from loss. The group grew, healing happened, and people who had silently suffered for years began to find their voice. Had Sarah taken that job in Chicago, none of it would have existed. The lives changed, the stories redeemed, it all began with a door God closed. We serve a God who not only opens doors, but also barricades the wrong ones, even when they look right. God reroutes for reasons that often don't reveal themselves immediately. He sees dangers we don't. He anticipates consequences we can't imagine. He responds not just to our desires, but to the full picture of our lives, including things we've never prayed about. There's a story from the Old Testament that mirrors this truth. The Israelites, when leaving Egypt, were told by God not to take the shorter route through the land of the Philistines. That way would have led directly to Canaan, but it would also have led to war. God said if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So he took them the long way around. It looked like a delay. It felt like a detour, but it was protection, not just from the enemy, but from themselves. God sometimes reroutes us to protect us from ourselves. How many times have we wanted something so badly that we were willing to compromise our peace to get it? We've ignored red flags. We've silenced the voice of conviction. We've run after something shiny only to realize it was hollow. And yet even then, God, compassionate beyond comprehension, steps in to redirect us. Not with force, but with opportunity to pause, to rethink, to return. Elijah, Sarah's friend, had a detour of his own. He was set to marry his longtime fiancée in California. He had moved there, started planning his future, even bought a house. But something in his spirit never fully rested. The closer the wedding got, the heavier he felt. 2 weeks before the big day, he called it off, not out of fear, but conviction. It took him a year to understand why. The woman he almost married ended up trapped in a pattern of manipulation and dishonesty that unraveled publicly. Had he moved forward, Elijah knew it would have destroyed not just his peace, but his ability to walk fully into his calling. What he once saw as heartbreak, he now calls deliverance. The most confusing seasons are often the most protective. Let's take this further. Detours don't just reroute us physically. They reroute our desires, our ambitions, our attachments. We pray for God's will, but sometimes what we really mean is, God, make my plan work. And when he doesn't, we accuse him of silence, abandonment, or delay. But he's not denying us. He's defending us from idolatry, from burnout, from the version of ourselves we were trying to build outside of his timing. This kind of protection is deep. It's surgical, it's precise, and it's rarely comfortable, but it's holy. Think of it this way: if you're driving and see road construction ahead, you'll likely be rerouted. The detour is longer, it's unfamiliar, but it's necessary because continuing forward would damage your car, or worse, endanger your life. That's what God does with your soul. When he sees danger ahead, emotional, spiritual, relational, he redirects. But here's the tension: we often associate discomfort with disapproval. We think that if we're uncomfortable, God must be disappointed with us. But what if the discomfort is the confirmation? What if the resistance you feel is actually God's way of turning your face towards something better? Sarah began to document these detours in what she called her faith map. On a large canvas, she pinned key moments in her life: plans that fell apart, jobs that were lost, relationships that ended. Then around each pin, she wrote what those moments eventually led to. Her failed college transfer led her to meet her mentor. Her broken engagement pushed her to explore writing. Her job rejection led to the start of a nonprofit. Each redirection became a thread in a tapestry she never could have woven on her own. This faith mapping became more than a personal exercise. It became a testimony. She began leading workshops, encouraging others to trace the fingerprints of God in their own detours. People cried, people laughed. Most of all, people healed. We need more of that kind of reflection in our lives, because without it, we see only closed doors and forget the blessings that entered through windows. So how do you respond when life reroutes you? First, don't panic. Panic is often our flesh reacting to unfamiliar terrain. God is not surprised. Even if your world feels like it's collapsing, he's already ahead of it, providing positioning, preparing. Second, ask better questions. Instead of, why is this happening to me? Try, what might God be shielding me from? Or what is this making room for? Third, give yourself permission to grieve. Even God-honoring detours can break your heart. Don't rush through the ache. Bring it to God. Let him speak into the pain with kindness. Finally, hold everything loosely: your plans, your timeline. even your image of what your life should look like. Because when your hands are open, it's easier for God to place something new in them. Your life is not off course. It's on a sacred route designed by a God who sees the full map. The valleys, the unseen intersections, the traffic you were spared from, He sees it all. And even when you don't feel it, you're being protected by detours that are more intentional than you realize. You haven't missed your destiny. You're being guided to it one divine turn at a time. And maybe one day you'll stand like Sarah did on a quiet hill, looking back not with regret, but with reverence. And you'll say that wasn't a detour, that was deliverance. The chapel in Linton Valley had once been just a building to Sarah, a place she went to sing worship songs and serve coffee on Sunday mornings. But after her detour from Chicago and the heartbreak that followed, that little chapel had become her sanctuary. A quiet refuge, not just from the world, but from the constant swirl of internal chaos. It was in those pews she learned a sacred truth: you can't receive the peace of God while your heart is wide open to every unfiltered emotion, person, and pressure. Not everyone deserves access to your heart. This isn't bitterness, it's wisdom. There are people who mean well but carry chaos. People who smile while speaking poison. People who draw near not to support you, but to siphon off your peace. And if you don't learn to set holy boundaries, your spirit will become a revolving door for confusion, disappointment, and emotional exhaustion. God never asked us to live with our hearts unguarded. In fact, Proverbs says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. That's not a suggestion, that's a divine instruction. Because the state of your heart doesn't just affect your feelings, it shapes your future. After the failure in Chicago and the slow unfolding of her purpose back in Linton, Sarah started noticing how quickly she could lose her peace. A single text message from her ex, a passive-aggressive comment from a church member, a scrolling session on social media that left her feeling behind in life. These things, though seemingly small, invaded her heart space, and for hours, sometimes days, she couldn't find her way back to clarity. So she began asking a bold question before every interaction. Is this life-giving or life-draining? And she didn't just ask it of people. She asked it of habits, of conversations, of commitments. That question became her filter for what deserved her time and emotional investment. The results were surprising. She realized she wasn't just tired, she was leaking energy, leaking clarity, leaking confidence. Not because she was weak, but because she wasn't guarded. In a culture that praises constant availability and calls it kindness, Sarah learned that true love sometimes says no, that compassion has boundaries, that saying yes to everything is not generosity, it's spiritual self-destruction. This revelation began to change her relationships, especially with Elijah. Their friendship had grown since he returned to Linton, and while there was a quiet tenderness growing between them, they both sensed something deeper, forming something sacred. But instead of rushing in, they chose a rhythm of intentionality. They took time to learn each other's patterns, triggers, and fears. They respected each other's boundaries. And most importantly, they kept God at the center of their connection. One evening, while sitting on the chapel steps watching the stars, Elijah told Sarah, I used to think protecting my heart meant putting up walls. But I think it's more about building gates. Not to keep everyone out, but to choose who and what comes in. That sentence changed something in Sarah. She realized that guarding the heart isn't about emotional coldness. It's about spiritual stewardship. It means creating space for the right things to grow. It means refusing to let past wounds reopen because of present carelessness. It means honoring your emotional energy as something sacred, not to be wasted, not to be misused. Sarah started implementing what she called her emotional Sabbath. Every week she set aside a full day, not just for rest, but for reset. No social media, no over-explaining, no people-pleasing, just worship, journaling, walking in nature, and asking God to renew her emotional center. She found that these moments recalibrated her in ways that no productivity ever could. The more she practiced this, the more she saw something strange happening. People started noticing the peace on her. They couldn't quite explain it, but they felt calmer around her. More grounded, more hopeful. That's the thing about peace, it's contagious. But you can't spread it if you don't first protect it. Some of the people who used to take advantage of Sarah's kindness started drifting away, not because she confronted them harshly, but because she stopped giving them unfiltered access to her time and heart. And when they left, her life got quieter, simpler, and much more beautiful. Sometimes peace begins not with what you add, but with what you release. This is the spiritual power of emotional boundaries. Elijah too had been on his own journey. After years of being the fixer in every relationship, he'd finally learned the freedom of not being responsible for everyone's healing. His role wasn't to carry people, only to walk beside them. He discovered that even Jesus in his love didn't heal everyone he met. He discerned. He withdrew. He protected his mission from emotional manipulation. And if Jesus did that, so should we. Elijah created a daily check-in he called the Heart Reset. Every night before bed, he asked himself 3 questions. 1. What drained me today? 2. What fed my soul today? 3. Did I overextend where God only asked me to be present? This practice wasn't just reflective, it was reformative. He began adjusting his yeses and nos based not on guilt or pressure, but on purpose and peace. Together, Elijah and Sarah began to teach these concepts to the group at church. Slowly, others in Linton started adopting these rhythms of emotional stewardship. Marriages got healthier. Burned-out volunteers found renewal. Teenagers learned that boundaries weren't rebellion, they were responsibility. There's something powerful about a community that protects its emotional health. It creates space for genuine love to flourish. And make no mistake, God cares about your emotional world. He cares about the relationships that confuse you. He cares about the comments that stuck in your mind longer than they should have. He cares about the fatigue that isn't physical, but soul deep. He cares about the resentment that quietly simmers beneath your surface. He doesn't shame you for it. He invites you to guard it. To guard your heart is to acknowledge its worth. So if you're in a season of chaos, if you feel emotionally exposed or constantly depleted, it might be time to pause and reassess your boundaries. Ask yourself, who am I allowing into spaces they haven't earned? What conversations do I keep having that only leave me more confused? What commitments have I said yes to that were rooted in guilt, not purpose? Where am I available but no longer aligned? And most importantly, am I still prioritizing my connection with God over my desire to be everything for everyone else? Because here's the truth, the enemy doesn't always attack with destruction. Sometimes he attacks with distraction. And if he can't make you quit, he'll try to make you exhausted. But exhaustion is not your destiny. Peace is. Peace that comes from honoring your capacity. Peace that flows from knowing you are not the savior, just a servant. Peace that rests in the confidence that God's opinion is the only one that truly defines you. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to stop explaining yourself. You are allowed to protect your heart, not because you're selfish, but because you're surrendered. God is not glorified by your burnout. He is glorified by your obedience. So pause, pull back, protect what matters, because everything flows from your heart, and your heart is worth guarding. Have you ever felt guilty for setting emotional boundaries? A. Yes, but now I see it's a holy act. B. No, I've always seen boundaries as necessary. Comment A or B below. Your reflection could free someone else from carrying more than they were called to. It was a late autumn evening in Linton Valley when Sarah sat alone in the chapel's side room, the same room where she and Elijah had held dozens of sessions for their emotional healing group. Candles flickered near the old wood-paneled wall, casting soft gold over her journal, where she just scribbled one desperate question: how do I stay faithful to what God called me to when everything else is louder than his voice? It was a season of noise. After the group's unexpected growth and the rising attention their ministry was receiving, even beyond Linton, Sarah felt a strange heaviness. Invitations were coming in to speak, to go, right, to collaborate. People wanted her story. They wanted her time. They wanted her fire. But as her name was whispered in larger rooms, her soul grew quieter, and not in the sacred way. Something was shifting, and it frightened her. She started noticing something she hadn't anticipated. Opportunities weren't always assignments. Some doors were opening simply because of momentum, not because of alignment. And Sarah, who had once wept on the chapel floor, begging God for direction, was now being asked to lead others, while barely hearing his whisper. It was a subtle danger. This is the type of warfare that doesn't come with chaos, it comes with applause. It doesn't shatter your confidence, It inflates your ego. It lures you not with sin, but with success. And if you aren't discerning, you'll mistake the crowd's affirmation for God's anointing. That night in the chapel, Sarah remembered something her grandmother once told her. Sometimes the enemy won't try to steal your calling. He'll just distract you from it with things that look holy but aren't holy for you. It hit her like a lightning bolt. The enemy had shifted his tactic. He wasn't showing up as discouragement anymore. He was showing up as overexposure, as pressure, as noise. And just like that, she realized her purpose wasn't under attack through obvious means. It was under siege by subtle invitations. That's when she began her purpose fast. For 21 days, she said no to every new opportunity. She unplugged from social media. She stopped answering emails that pulled her in multiple directions. She recentered herself on the one who had called her in the first place. It was a painful silence at first, but then clarity returned. Not lightning bolt revelations, just quiet assurance. This is where I have you. Don't rush ahead of me. Elijah joined her in the fast not because he felt lost, but because he sensed a similar drift in his own spirit. Their work was helping people, but helping doesn't always equal holy. He too had started chasing fruit more than faithfulness. They both needed the reset. They created a rhythm they now teach in their leadership circle. Discern before you decide. It sounds simple, but in a world where everything demands immediate answers, this kind of pause is revolutionary. Discernment became their guardrail. They started asking hard questions before taking on anything new. Is this consistent with what God has asked of me in this season? Am I doing this to prove something or to be faithful? Will this draw me closer to God or just closer to influence? The results were immediate. Some opportunities vanished, ones that had seemed promising. Others remained and deepened. But most importantly, they were no longer overwhelmed by the noise of shoulds and coulds. They were anchored in the sacred must of obedience. Let's be honest, purpose is fragile in the hands of popularity. You start something for the Lord, and if you're not careful, you'll start managing it for the crowd. This is why protecting your purpose matters. Because the moment you let public opinions shape private obedience, you begin to dilute your calling. Sarah and Elijah returned to a guiding verse that became their anchor. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. Not the crowd, not the culture, me. But what if the voice of God gets drowned out? What if your heart is sincere, but your soul is overloaded? Then you must retreat to recover your rhythm. Sarah found that the more she decluttered her schedule, the more space she made for presence. And in presence, she rediscovered passion, not the hype-driven kind, but the holy fire that burns slow and steady. Here's the truth, not every good thing is your God thing. There will always be someone asking you to do more. There will always be another opportunity, another platform, another path that promises quicker success. But speed is not the same as sanctification. Noise is not confirmation. And impact without intimacy with God is ultimately hollow. If you don't protect your purpose, others will define it for you. That's why discernment isn't optional. It's survival. There are 4 voices that compete with God's in the modern believer's life. 1. Culture always demanding performance. 2. Comparison always whispering you're behind. 3. Chaos constantly spinning the wheel of urgency. 4. Compromise disguised as opportunity. Sarah started identifying these voices in her journal. Every time she felt confused, she'd write the thought down and ask, whose voice is this? She began learning how to separate her shepherd's whisper from the noise of her own ambition. That was the breakthrough. Because purpose without discernment can become just another hustle. Elijah, on his end, began removing distractions from his daily life. He limited meetings, reduced screen time, and started every morning not with productivity, but with stillness. In that stillness, he started hearing God again, not as a taskmaster, but as a friend. One of their most transformative teachings now comes from this principle. If the enemy can't discourage you, he'll try to distract you with things that impress others, but exhaust you. Think about that. Some of the most dangerous distractions are the ones applauded by the people around you. This is why solitude is sacred. Jesus often withdrew to quiet places, not because he was hiding, but because he was protecting his connection. You can't pour out if you're spiritually disconnected, and you can't hear clearly if you're emotionally overcommitted. Sarah and Elijah's ministry didn't shrink when they stepped back. It deepened. People began coming not for noise, but for nourishment. They found safety in the clarity and quiet strength of a purpose that was protected, not polished. So how do you protect your purpose? Start with these. Fast from applause. Let God's approval be enough. Practice silence. Listen more than you post. Reflect more than you react. Discern your yes. Every yes is a seed. Don't sow into soil God didn't give you. Prioritize intimacy over influence. Don't trade nearness for notoriety. And always remember, purpose is not about being seen. It's about being faithful. In a world that shouts, "Make it big," God still whispers, "Make it holy." Protect your purpose not by building a brand, but by building an altar. One where your ego dies and your obedience rises. It was early spring in Linton Valley. The chill in the air had softened and the first green shoots had begun to stretch from the soil, as if the land itself were exhaling after a long-buried winter. On the back hill of the chapel, where Sarah often walked to clear her thoughts, a new bench had been placed overlooking the quiet fields. Elijah had carved it from oak and engraved 3 words on the side, "Still he shields." That phrase had become a sacred truth for them, both a phrase born not out of theory but out of journey. The journey of closed doors and divine detours, of emotional boundaries and spiritual warfare, of rising voices and the quiet need for discernment. And now at last, a new realization was rising. Like the spring bloom, the purpose had not just been preserved, it was thriving. They weren't merely being protected from something anymore. They were now protected for something. And that changed everything. For much of Sarah's life, protection had felt like limitation, like restraint, like God holding her back from what she thought was hers. But as she sat on the new bench, she looked back at the season that had just passed, the season of refinement, rerouting, and revelation, and she saw it clearly. She hadn't been kept from anything good. She had been prepared for something greater. Protection wasn't about restriction, it was about readiness. When God shields you, He isn't just keeping pain out, He's fortifying the sacred things within you. Things that take time to build. Things like identity, clarity, and the courage to walk with boldness even when you don't fully see what's ahead. Sarah breathed in the soft air of the valley and felt something she hadn't felt in years: confidence. Not the kind that demanded visibility or applause, not the kind that needed certainty or validation, but the quiet, anchored kind. The kind rooted in knowing God is with me. I am not alone. I am covered. That's what real protection feels like. It feels like peace. And peace, once tasted, becomes non-negotiable. Elijah joined her moments later carrying 2 mugs of coffee. No words were exchanged for a while, just silence shared and sacred. After everything they had learned how to be together without filling the air. That too was a kind of protection, protecting each other's peace without needing to explain everything. As the sun warmed the horizon, Elijah finally spoke. "You know," he said, "there's a kind of confidence that only grows in hiddenness. I used to think strength came from proving myself, but now I think it comes from knowing I don't have to." Sarah smiled. "Because you're already shielded." He nodded. "Exactly. They didn't need the spotlight to feel worthy anymore. They didn't need the approval of people to measure progress. They had learned to live under the covering of God's presence, and that covering was more secure than any applause ever could be." There's something deeply liberating about realizing you're protected. Not just in theory, but in your actual, messy daily life. You're protected when you walk into a room unsure of your role because God has already gone before you. You're protected when others misunderstand your motives because God knows your heart. You're protected when the future feels uncertain because God holds it with certainty. And the more you believe this, the more you can live differently. You begin to make decisions from peace, not panic. You begin to respond with grace, not defensiveness. You begin to show up fully even when outcomes are unclear. You begin to let go, not as surrender to defeat, but as surrender to divine direction. Sarah and Elijah developed a practice they called the daily trust check-in. It wasn't long or complicated, just a few minutes each morning where they asked themselves a simple question: am I trusting today, or am I trying to control? This daily pause changed their rhythm. It reminded them that control was never the goal, connection was. They didn't need to be perfect. They just needed to stay close. Because proximity to God is what activates protection. It's not about praying louder, it's about living aligned, walking closely, listening gently. Protection isn't always about avoiding the fire. Sometimes it's about walking through it and coming out without the smell of smoke, because he was with you the entire time. You don't need to be strong enough. You just need to be close enough. This is what Jesus taught in his quiet moments with the disciples. Not through grand speeches, but through his presence. When the storm came and the boat was sinking, his presence calmed it. When the crowd pressed in and chaos threatened to consume, his words centered them. When the cross loomed and fear gripped their hearts, his resurrection reminded them, you are never unprotected. Sarah looked out at the field and saw something strange. 2 deer grazing not far from the chapel's fence. They moved slowly, unafraid. It was as if they knew they were safe on that hill surrounded by stillness. And she thought, that's how I want to live. Not rushing, not hiding, just steady, just grounded, just shielded. To live shielded is not to live sheltered. It's not avoidance, it's awareness. A deep, sacred awareness that God is not just watching you, he's with you. He's ahead of you. He's behind you. He surrounds you on all sides. This truth reshapes everything. You don't fear opportunities anymore because you know what's not for you will pass you. You don't chase people anymore because those meant for your life won't require you to beg. You don't live in reaction anymore because peace becomes your posture, not panic. And even in heartbreak or hardship, you carry this holy whisper, still he shields. Linton Valley hadn't changed much, but Sarah and Elijah had. And because of that, their ministry would never be the same. They didn't teach from exhaustion anymore. They taught from overflow. They didn't seek to rescue people anymore. They walked with them. They didn't prove themselves anymore. They just lived as evidence of what God can do with people who stop striving and start trusting. Maybe this is the invitation for you too, to live shielded, to live with confidence, not because you have all the answers, but because you know who holds them, to trust the stillness, to embrace the shield, to stop fighting battles you were never called to fight, and instead to dwell in the covering of the one who never loses. Because the greatest confidence doesn't come from your own strength. It comes from knowing you are deeply, fully, and forever protected. What kind of protection are you most grateful for right now, A? The doors God closed before I saw the danger. B, the peace I feel knowing I'm never walking alone. Comment A or B below, and let your testimony be a shield for someone else. Your story might be the reminder they've been praying for. Before you scroll away, pause for just a moment. If something in this message stirred your heart, if even one sentence felt like it was written just for you, then don't let it stop here. This wasn't just a video. This was a divine reminder. A whisper from God himself saying, you are seen, you are covered, you are protected. Right now, someone you love, someone you know, is silently wrestling with disappointment, confusion, or fear. They need this message, not just as encouragement, but as a lifeline. Don't underestimate the power of sharing hope. So if your heart was moved, if your spirit feels lifted, then do this. Leave a comment below, share your answer, let others know they're not alone. Then send this video to one person who needs to hear that they are still being shielded by God. Let's become a ripple of reassurance in a weary world. You never know, your simple share could become someone else's turning point. This isn't the end, it's a beginning. Keep walking, stay anchored, and remember always, even in the silence, still he shields.